Truth and Tea with the Urban Evangelist. Welcome to Truth and Tea with the Urban Evangelist.
The dictionary definition of infertility is not the sum of the challenges. It falls into two categories, primary and secondary. Primary infertility refers to never having had a pregnancy that resulted in a live birth. Secondary infertility refers to difficulty conceiving or continuing a pregnancy to live birth after at least one pregnancy. Despite its social importance, infertility is understudied in Zambia, as indicated by the lack of data on infertility rates. And so it often remains a hidden and lonely struggle for many couples, concealed by the very nature of the topic itself. Infertility has been misunderstood both in culture and Christianity alike. But today, we unpack this very difficult and complex subject, and we filter it through faith. Joining me today is my special friend, Mutinta Stembachulufia, also known as the Peculiar Christian. Welcome to the Truth and Tea podcast.
Thank you for having me, the Urban Evangelist.
It's an honor to have you. I know that there'll be so much to learn from you, just based on the journey that you've been on, and you're still on it.
Yes, I'm actually really excited, but I'm hoping there won't be any tears because you always cover waterworks.
So I'll behave. I'll try to behave.
But it's such an honor and a privilege to be here and for the very first time, I talk to the public about my struggle and my walking faith in being a parent in waiting.
I actually want to start there because it's already difficult as is, to speak to people within your own close circle.
Yes.
Just to come up to someone and say, listen, I think we might be having a challenge in trying to start a family.
Yeah.
What has compelled you today? What has given you the permission to share your story and to share it so publicly?
Well, first and foremost, I believe it's something that I haven't spoken to those who aren't within my circle about, but as a minister of the gospel, we are epistles of Christ. Yeah. So we are love letters. You watch us as we follow this God that we're following, and there's no better time than this to speak about it because you can't be a minister of the gospel and not be vulnerable. I believe the most effective way to be a minister is to speak to your struggles and your wins and teach others how they can work, with what they're working with, but they're edified by our testimonies. And this is my testimony.
Amazing. You heard me define what infertility is, and that it's actually divided into primary and secondary categories.
Yes.
How have you defined it, and how has this journey defined you?
In the beginning, it was really hard. We've been married 14 years, my husband and I, and we've had such a beautiful marriage. But one of the things that everybody looks at is having fruit in that marriage, and everybody talks about how it solidifies the marriage. It hasn't really changed us as people, but it changes how people look at you, especially based on our culture. And for me, I don't define it as infertility, but the medical term for it is infertility.
Right.
And the hardest part has been not having anything wrong with you. I remember in the beginning, it was just, we've been friends for 15 years, you and I. And in the beginning, I wasn't even open to the idea of being tested. I wasn't open to the idea of trying other avenues. Yeah. And you opened up and said, listen, we need to have this conversation. In as much as you're running away from it, we need to have it. And having that conversation with you brought me to a place where I began to speak to God about it. And it took maybe about 7 years after that conversation for me to actually gather the strength and go to the doctors and say, listen, is there something wrong? And when I went to the doctor, I was expecting that there was something wrong because I've tried for so long and it's never happened. I've never fallen pregnant. I had never had a miscarriage. So I was wondering, maybe there's something wrong. And we got to the doctor and the doctor said to me, listen, and I remember it was my 30th birthday. Yeah. And the doctor said to me, you're extremely fertile. You should actually be helping women who can't have babies by giving them eggs.
Wow.
And I said, so then why aren't we having children? And she says, everything's fine, you're ovulating perfectly, but we just have to wait on God. So for me, infertility for me means waiting on the time that God sees fit. And ideally, it brings me back to Abraham and Sarah. Yeah. They waited 25 years, but God still did it. So my my point when I come to infertility is realizing that in what people see is unfruitful, God has a way of taking us through a process that brings us to a place of fruitfulness.
When you first got married, did you want to get into starting your family right away?
I did. I thought maybe we would take like the 2 years of honeymoon,
Right.
and we moved 4 days into our marriage into the diaspora, and ideally I thought we would immediately fall pregnant because there was no contraception, there was nothing of the sorts. And the first year was very frustrating because every month you see your cycle. And then it goes to the second year, then it was the third year. And I remember in the fourth year, I started buying baby clothes and fitting them into a basket. And then I realized it's not happening. And I got to a point where I began to grieve for something I didn't have. And my outlook on life was a little different then. But sitting where I am now, I realize that everything is God's timing.
Yeah. What was the most frustrating thing about every month, like you say, your cycle is kicking in, and you're hopeful? And I think I would like to believe that the most difficult part is to begin to psych yourself all over again, and hoping that this time around my cycle won't kick in. What was that like for you?
That was terrible. I remember there was a time when you and I are very close, but really, really close. And there was a time when I was really believing for children, and you and Memory got pregnant at the same time. And it was the issue of you couldn't travel because you couldn't buy the baby clothes, and I had to. And I remember at that point, I said to God, okay, if you're really trying me in this at this point, how am I supposed to feel? And it was the excitement in the midst of me wanting something from God. It was the issue of somebody trusting you enough to let you into their parenting. And that made me see parenting in a whole different level. And I have another friend, she's Memory, and she was pregnant and she was having a girl. And it's funny, all throughout her pregnancy, I was doing the baby shopping, I did the baby shower. And then I began to realize that in order for me to allow God to be God, I needed to trust him in the process, because I'd gone to the point where I'm angry. I've gone to the point where I really wanted it.
Yeah.
But having to watch the closest ones to me have children and making a part of their children's lives, and through the birthing process, through the clothes, learning about, I'm having morning sickness today. The boys felt like this. I remember when I bought the baby Moses basket for the twins, I kept telling you, don't let people touch them. Keep them in the basket when you take them. Yeah. And it's the boys, spending time with them and them, calling me baby or auntie, and we eat together. It changed my perspective. Yes, I wanted it for myself, but seeing it in the lives of the people that I loved most made me realize that there was hope for me. And if I could be an extension of love to those, God will trust me enough to give me my own.
Beautifully said. So there's those that obviously in your inner circle, and they've had conversations with you about it, they'll be able to open up and bring you into their own parenting journey. Like, I was quite intentional about that with you. But then have you experienced, the other end of the spectrum where it's a bit awkward for people to discuss children around you, and they kind of feel like they are treading on eggshells where that topic is concerned? What has that been like?
So you know me, I live a very social life, but I'm a very private person. So I remember the worst one was, my mother and I were shopping. I had come to visit Zambia, and we went to game stores at Marital, and there was a family friend we hadn't seen in a long time. And the first thing she did was touch my stomach, and she said, "Nanomba,"
Wow.
And I literally saw my mother getting to a place of anger and literally take the lady's hand off my stomach. And all I could do, because in that moment I had to put myself together, all I could do was just walk away. And in my walking away, God said to me, "Go back." And I went back and I said to her, "It's just not time." But it was seeing the look on my mother's face. And if you're a mother, you want to see your children have children. We want to be a grandmother. Yes. And in that instance, she went into defense mode. And when she was done defending me, I looked at her and I said, "It shouldn't bother you like that, especially because you're a praying mom. And if you've been gratified with having me, then it's possible I'll have my own kids. But we can't control the narrative. And most people in Zambia don't really talk about infertility. They don't know how to handle people who haven't had children. It's often blamed on a woman. There's always that emphasis, if you can't have kids, there's something wrong with you. If you can't have kids, then, you're just not enough. But you see, marriage in essence, yes, God tells us to multiply and be fruitful. But there's more to marriage than just children. And there's several ways to be a parent. It's just not about you giving birth.
Yeah.
So ideally, I'm learning to love even the terrible questions. I'm learning to not really bother about the opinions of other people. But like I said, my support system, my family, my friends, we've gotten to a place where we understand each other. I mean, my friends don't even say their kid's name. They'll probably just say your son. And then when I ask which son, then you'll be like, oh, TJ, CJ. Or Tamara will say, oh, I mean Gabby, or Zoe. And then I get to understand, or it will be King B and Hannah. So in my circle, I've gotten to be a parent. And that's exciting for me. But the most exciting thing in my journey is through this, in the 14 years, my husband and I got to adopt. And our daughter is 19 now. And when we adopted, she was 12. So the dynamic for us has changed. We're learning to be parents and waiting for our biological children. But we now have a child.
I like that you've touched on adoption, and I will get to that a little bit later. But take me through, you're in your home, you and your husband.
Yeah.
And you've obviously both noticed that it's not happening yet. What was the process of openly acknowledging it to one another and then deciding, let's now get to the bottom of this and what is the way forward? What was that like? Because it might be easier perhaps to speak to your mom.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hardest to admit it to the person you're in a situation with. Are you able to talk us through it?
Yeah, I will. So in the beginning, I think after having the conversation with myself and having the conversation with God, I was really adamant about us getting checked, us, not just waiting on God. And my husband is as spiritual as I am. He's very spiritual. And with him, it's like, oh, Hannah waited. Sarah waited. They didn't go to a doctor to check. They just trusted God. And in the beginning of our marriage, I'd say like for the first 10 years, that's the headspace my husband was in. He was like, there's no need for us to go to a doctor. There's no need for us to find out. We say that we're believers, so let's just believe. And it was very hard because with my husband, he's 10 years older. And everybody in his circle has children. And so he got to the point where when you go to church, he's the guy in the back holding everybody's kid, or, he wants to be a part of everybody's children's lives. And I could see that he really wanted to be a parent. And so we started having the conversation, the honest conversation with ourselves. And with him, it became a prayer point. Whereas with me, it was a prayer point earlier in our marriage. And I had made peace with the fact that, God, you would do it in your own time. So we got to a place where we were indifferent. He was at the place where he was really trusting God that this would happen. And I had gotten to a space where I was like, God, whether you do it or not, you're still God. And so we found ourselves at loggerheads. And I remember we once had an honest conversation. He took me out for dinner and he said to me, you know what, I want to try, asking for help and seeing, is there something wrong? What do we do going forward? And I said to him, you know what, let's wait. Let's wait until I turn 30 and then, we can then do it. So we then, sought for help. And like I said to you, we went to the doctors, we did all the necessary tests, and then there was the big elephant in the room. There's nothing wrong. And then we're back to, so if there's nothing wrong, then why? And we got to the point where we have...
Did that make it worse for you at that point? Knowing that there's absolutely, at least biologically, there's nothing wrong.
Yes.
But then for the life of you, you still just cannot.
Yeah, it was very painful. It was very hard. And the worst part that hurt the most for me is someone saying you could be somebody's help by giving them eggs. And I asked myself, why would I want to surrogate or give somebody an egg to help them when I'm in this predicament myself? What if I help somebody and I myself don't get it, And knowing that you're extremely fertile, I'm one of those women that doesn't miss their cycle. I ovulate every month. So that really means everything is top notch. And not seeing the fruit of that makes it very difficult. So I went through a season where I can't really call it depression. I can't really call it, but I got to a place where I was like, so what's the point? You give me this wonderful uterus that's filled with all these eggs that need to be, fertilized, and then they're not fertilized, they're not we're at this place, and you give me this wonderful marriage, this wonderful man, and we just can't have children. What are you then saying? And that was within the time that I made the move to do some work in the US. And I got to experience the same thing I had been experiencing here with friends over there, still being a parent in a place that's unfamiliar, and learning that there's hospital visits, there's a first haircut. So I got to a place where I got to understand that God is a process. There's something that you're doing with me, there's something that you're teaching me. And God then began to speak to me about saying, I'm not saying you won't have them, I'm saying they'll come, but there's so much that you need to do for me, and I'm preparing you for that. Then I had to now explain this to my partner, who was eagerly waiting for children. And then we got to the point where my husband, when we started asking for help, my husband began to read. And in his reading, he said, today he would send something on IVF, he would send something on insulin. So there was all these things that were happening that he was teaching me and I was learning for. And I was not open to the idea of getting help in that area. I wanted to know what was wrong, but I didn't want to try the medical way of things. And through that process, us talking, us still getting to know each other, and that's one thing me and my husband do, we still date within our marriage. It started getting comfortable, all the ideas and the notions, and then I got to have the conversation, and I believe with you as well. And we talked about how, in as much as it's IVF, in as much as it's all these other things, what you need to understand that life necessarily comes from God. Every good and perfect gift comes from the Lord. So He's part of the process. But He's given us people that help us get to the process. And ideally, that's where we are.
That's where you're at. You mentioned that you would buy baby clothes.
Yeah.
Was that part of, living out your faith? And would you buy the clothes together? And what did you do with the clothes? Have you held on to them?
So the first time I bought the clothes, I bought like a basket full of clothes, like a really big box of clothes, and we would buy them in twos. So we believe because God's taken so long, that's our notion, they'll probably come in twos, and hopefully maybe He'll do three if we're lucky. But ideally, so we bought in twos, and it would usually be blues and gray, or like green and yellow. And we started feeling this box in the beginning. I think it was in the 4th year going to the 5th. We started feeling this box as a way of us exercising our faith and feeling God, we were waiting. So we'd buy everything. And this one day, my period came a day late, which never happens. And I was so angry because that one day wait for me felt like, it's really happened. It's happened. I'm pregnant. And we were so excited. And I remember my husband at the time was fasting. The next day, I woke up to my cycle. And that particular day, I had a friend, her name is Jawash. I threw her shower, I think you remember, at my house. And that was the day of her shower. And that's the day when I had my cycle with this big box. I woke up that morning and I packed up everything that is in the box. I was so livid. And I said to God, I just can't do this anymore.
Were you angry at God?
Yes, I was. Because I wondered, so why the one day delay? Why this whole box of clothes? And that was like, I think the 4th or the 5th year of my marriage. We packed up everything, and at the shower, I just made it part of the gifts because I was so angry, And as the shower went on, my mood changed. I changed. I was happy. Everything went back to normal. And then from that time, I didn't want to buy anything. But my husband did because he was still in that place of, God will do it, And every time that there would be a prayer altar call for, people who wanted fruitfulness, we were standing up. And I remember each time my man of God would always say to me that there's nothing wrong, you don't have to keep on coming for prayer. Just wait on God. And I would say, but what's happening? So every time I would be standing. And I remember this one time I went to church, they made the call. And as I was about to stand up, he looked at me, the man of God, and ideally it meant sit down.
Wow.
And I sat down. And then the pandemic happened. COVID happened, and my husband and I walked into Ackerman's, and we were buying baby clothes for someone else as a gift. And he found these really pretty jackets, like winter jackets. And he said, can we buy this for the twins? Because we have a joke, I call you Bashimpondi, just as a way of faith.
Right.
And he said to me, can we buy them? I know we're not buying baby clothes anymore, but can we just buy them and believe and take a picture? And so we bought them and we took a picture. And I remember that day we went home when it was a pandemic and there was Mama Funke on, and I follow her a lot from Nigeria. And she was hosting a prayer summit for mothers in Waiting, women who were believing for children. And for the very first time, my husband and I, in a long time, actually prayed about children.
Wow.
And I'll kid you not, that was the last time I prayed for children. It's not the biggest thing in the room for me anymore. My biggest thing right now is serving God and serving God with purpose and realizing that He is true to His promise.
Amen.
And that's why I'm here today, to encourage people to be parents.
Yeah.
You mentioned Sarah and Abraham, and I think if we just dig all through scripture, because infertility is not a modern day term.
No,
I mean, it's there in the Bible. You look at Elizabeth and Zechariah, the parents of John the Baptist. You look at Rachel and Jacob. You know, they waited on God. There was a prolonged period where they had to just wait on Him to give them children, or a child at least to begin with. And eventually it happened for them.
Yes.
And what I just want to hear from you is, how do you keep that waiting on God still active, even though, you know, it's taken a different turn altogether? You're not exactly praying every day, like you said, that's the last time that you prayed about it.
Yes.
But is there a way that you still keep that hope alive? You keep that faith active?
Yeah, so for me, I've gotten to a place where I understand that in my service to God, God has a way of rewarding me. And one of the promises of God is to be fruitful. And being fruitful isn't only in the area of children. Being fruitful is being fruitful in the essence of life. So abundance has to stem from everything. You have an abundance of health, you have an abundance of joy, abundance of finances. And I believe God doesn't give you something until you're ready for it. So all this time, I felt I was ready for children. But as my career progresses, as my walk with God progresses, as being an itinerary minister, I do a lot of traveling.
Yes,
I travel around the world. And I've come to realize that had I had children, I would have served God the way I'm serving God now. I wouldn't be able to put my life in pause as much as I do, because I'm away sometimes for 6-7 months on end. And so when God does things, He's intentional. He's a mystery, yes, but everything that He does with us in mind. And learning that has come as a result of exercising my faith. I'll be honest, it's been very hard. It's not an easy journey. And there's a way that people look at you when you don't have children. There's things that they say. I remember I was asking a friend who was going through something, and I said to them, but why can't you just do it like this? And they said, you don't know what it's like because you don't have kids. You know, and when they said that to me, at first it was really like ate at me. And then I realized, okay, that's how they see it. That's their perception. And so my perspective on life is being happy. It's being joyful. You see, happiness comes from the environment, but joy comes from God. And my validation doesn't come from a man. My validation comes as a result of my relationship with God. So I have found a place in His presence where I've begun to be intimate and vulnerable with Him. That in my vulnerability, He's opted to give me strength for my weakness. So what everybody thinks is an inadequacy is actually my superpower. It allows me to thrive in my ministry. It allows me to pray for the people that I pray for without holding anything back. And I've come to realize that God He's faithful. He's faithful to the latter. And there's nothing that He won't do. So I'm at a place where I'm encouraging people. It doesn't matter what form children come in, but you have to be able to embrace it. And you have to be willing to ask for help. Sometimes the conversation isn't only for women, the conversation is for men. There are men that are battling with infertility. A lot of men are afraid to get tested. A lot of men are living with children who aren't their children because women opted for an easy way out, which was wrong. They opted to have children with other fathers and say, listen, this is our child. But ideally, couples should get to a point where they're able to identify the problem and seek for help. And it doesn't mean if you go for IVF, you're not spiritual. It doesn't mean if you drunk fertility enhancement drugs, you're not spiritual. It means that you are a person who realizes that something needs to be done about my problem, and I want a solution towards it. So the journey is hard. It's not easy. There's days when I've been angry with God. There's days when I want children so much. And as I grow older, I see that there's then the thing called legacy. And legacy doesn't stem just from us. It stems from the Bible. Abraham was a father to nations. And Abraham didn't have children for 25 years. But when Isaac came about, his faith was tested too. And you see how we're the seed of Abraham. And I too want to have my own seed. I work as much as I do now, but I want to have children. And that's where I am with God. I'm saying to him, I'm waiting on you. And when I wait on you, you do what you need to do. But in this time, I'm going to use this time to make people understand there's nothing wrong with waiting.
I know in marriages, there's nobody that has a problem-free marriage. We fight with our spouses. We have disagreements. Is this an area where, you were really tested as a couple in terms of disagreements?
I'll be honest with you. We've never had a disagreement that stemmed from the issue of not having children.
Okay.
But we've had family that has asked the question, like, when are they coming? My mom will always say to us, I just don't want to be, keeping my puppy. I want an actual grandchild. And sometimes it's that elephant in the room that you have to deal with. But we haven't had any problems in terms of arguing about it. We've had other disagreements. And when we had our daughter, for me, it was very scary having to bring somebody new into our environment. And like I said, she was 12 and now she's 19. I wasn't open to it. My husband was open to it at the time. And that was very scary for me because I had gotten comfortable with where I was. And now it's the issue of we're in this space where we've gotten to a space where we fully understand each other. But for one of us, they are so eager to have children.
What role has the faith community played, both good and bad?
If you remember in the beginning, I was so adamant that it was my village people. If you remember, I do. And so in the beginning, I was like, this is my village people. So every time we would go to the mountain, remember, it would be openly my village people, my father's side, my mother. And that was my prayer point, in the beginning. And to be honest, I remember we visited Pastor Aaron, and he touched on it, and he prayed for us. And I'll be very honest, I believe the Truth and Tea show is a very honest and vulnerable place. You remember I used to wear my belly ring at the time. And Pastor Aaron came at me and he prayed for me and he placed his hand on my belly. And at the same time, my half brother was believing for children, and he wasn't believing for twins, he was believing for one child. And months later, they were pregnant with twin boys. So you remember, I'm such a boy mom. I'm not that mom that really wants girls. I'm that mom that loves boys. And I was like, God, you have a sense of humor. Because Pastor Allen was straight to the point. And in his prayer, he said, my brother would start first and then it would come to me. But what my brother was given by God was my prayer point. And it was so funny. And when I came back to you, I was like, Inza, you won't believe it. So my brother's pregnant and they're having twin boys. And couldn't God just give them one and then throw the two to me? And so afterwards, I dealt with this this big lump in my chest because I was like, okay, God, how do you work? I want to understand that. And so in the beginning, for me, it was more spiritual. I really thought there was the wickedness behind it. But as the time went on and I started seeing God do other things, I realized it was just him. So it's nothing spiritual, but I believe everything is spiritual. It's just his timing. But I feel like sometimes you want to blame the enemy a lot. And we always want to throw the blame on somebody else without truly realizing that in everything, God is all powerful.
Amen to that.
What is Mother's Day like and Father's Day like?
That's hard. Every Mother's Day, every Father's Day is hard. And so for me, I celebrate Mother's Day. I celebrate my mother's. So both, I do a lot of gifting on Mother's Day. But generally, before we had Ella, that's my daughter, before we had her, and she would do the gifting for me on Mother's Day. It was really hard. And it's still hard because everybody's doing these lovely posts, their baby bumps and all that. And you're wondering, when will the time come? When will I hold my own baby? Will I do a pregnancy shoot, and all that. And sometimes because you're gaining weight and the body's changing, I mean, I was way smaller when I got married. And sometimes people think the weight gain is because you're pregnant. I battle sometimes with a little nausea. Some people ask also, are you pregnant? And so Mother's Days are hard, but as the time goes, I'm learning to appreciate other mothers and celebrate other mothers. And so mostly we do this thing as Peculiar Foundation, my nonprofit. So for Women's Month, we don't do it during Mother's Day, but we do it for Women's Month, which is the month of August in South Africa. We celebrate women from all walks of life. So every year we try to give out something to 100 women to celebrate them being wonderful moms. So I've structured my pain into something meaningful.
That's incredible. You mentioned the time that you are educating yourselves on the options that are there on starting a family. Have you tried to go through with IVF?
No, we haven't. And the reason why we haven't is because, to be honest, I'm just not in that headspace yet. I've been really busy with my career since the pandemic.
Is it something you would do?
It's something I'm open to, very open to.
Okay.
And I have done my research. I've actually done my consult. Let's say
all right. Okay.
Because it's what they said.
Yeah.
I've done the consult, but
we actually have one in Zambia.
Yes, we have one in Zambia, but I've done my research. I won't go with the one in Zambia, but I believe they're very fantastic. I've seen some of their testimonials. The only reason I wouldn't go with one in Zambia is because I'm not resident in Zambia at the moment. But I've done my research and open to it. I'm just going to take a little time, but hopefully next year we can then, do something about it.
I'm going to throw you a curveball question. In doing your research, did you take into consideration like ethics when it comes to really advanced, medical ways of starting a family? And I think the other day I was watching something, and there's an actress. She's part of a show that I used to love to watch, Modern Family, Sofia Vergara.
Yes.
So she recently announced separation from her husband.
Yes.
And she was previously married.
Yeah.
So with the husband before her husband now, they had their embryos frozen. And I didn't know that they actually are in a very vicious legal battle.
Oh, yes.
Because she wants them destroyed.
Yeah.
And he wants them, literally inseminated, if that's the term, into another person. But she's saying, wait a minute, that's my DNA, that's my egg, you can't do that. What are some of the ethical considerations that probably would have people on the fence about seeking, a really advanced medical route?
Okay, so, one of the things I've discovered is that in Africa, most of the time, when we speak about ethical, we always tend to... Africa is a way of putting a blame with women a lot. But if you study, the Mayo Clinic actually says a third of men also have a problem in infertility issues. And so sometimes it's the dynamic. It could be that you have frozen embryos and you're going to fertilize an egg, or it could be that men are actually suffering and they have azoospermia, so they don't have any sperm to fertilize at all. And if they need to do that, then there's a procedure that they undergo for them to harvest the sperm. But if the sperm is not viable, then they would have to have a donor. So when you look at a donor, these are people that necessarily don't ask for their identity to be open, but it's just semen that's given. Sometimes some couples will pick within what their husband looks like, so the baby can look a little bit like them and whatnot, their medical background. But actually the child will never know that they were not from that parent because two parents have decided to have this child. And then there's the instance where you have a surrogate. Because a woman is not ovulating, she can't have her own egg. So that woman would then have to take an egg and be fertilized by her husband's semen. And when you go through the process of learning the procedures, you understand that there are women that sell their eggs and there are women that get paid the gestation period to bring that child to birth. I mean, we have so many celebrities doing it in the West. We even have some people doing it here in Nigeria, where they're having kids this way. But like I said, there's so much ethics and there's so many battles, especially as partners, when you decide to move forward. What happens then? Because in as much as the other partner is not having a child, that child is theirs because you went through the process together. So if you then choose to divorce, it turns into an agony legal battle. So I'm encouraging everybody to really have the conversation. And as much as they're having the conversation, it has to be black and white. So you have to have laws that protect the both of you if you choose to go that route. It's different from IVF because you're getting help in terms of just the two of you being fertilized. But if there's a problem with one of you, I mean, it's something that's different. Yeah. And for most couples, I don't feel like it's necessary to discuss how your child came about if you're not comfortable with it. Yeah. Because not every African man or African woman wants that stripped from them, how their child came about. Some people have this thing, if you had a child through IVF, it's like, oh, your baby was made in a tube. But in actual sense, the baby still goes back into the stomach. So we really need to educate our people, but also the culture in itself needs to begin to change.
Do you think the societal expectations are harder on men or women?
I feel like they're harder on women.
On women.
I'll kid you not, today I had a conversation.
Or do you think perhaps men have an even bigger internal struggle?
Okay, I'll be very honest. Men actually struggle more internally than women, because women, we've been afforded the space to talk about it with other women. Whilst with men, they can't talk about it with their peers. Yeah. They can't talk about it with their elders, because for them it's seen as inadequacy. Yeah. And that has created a space where a lot of men, in as much as they look happy, they're very depressed. And if they don't have the kind of faith that we have, they're drawn into drinking, they're drawn into smoking, and that even worsens the expectation of having children, because already you're putting your semen at risk. But ideally, I would want for us to create safe spaces. I mean, Mary Stopes has a health clinic for men. They've been there for years. And they check on men, they look at men, and you're free to go there. I believe most of their services are free. And not only that, if you're in a church setup, I mean, find people that you can be vulnerable with as a man, because it's important to have the conversation, not only for your spouse, but also for you as a person. How do you envision parenting going forward? Because as much as we may say it, we all dream of having that little somebody that looks up to you with these eyes that just gush. So it's important.
You settled for adoption.
Yes, I did.
How is that going for you?
I won't lie, it's beautiful. And so my daughter is 19, she's at UNISA, her name is Ella. And to be honest, I think it's the best thing that I ever did. And I remember last year, October, we vacationed. So my daughter, myself, and my mom. Yeah. And my daughter asked me that she thought that me adopting would mean to me not having any children of my own. Yeah. And she wants to understand, now that we're talking about kids more, will it change how I feel about her? Will it change that she's the first one? Mm. And I said to her, because it was just me, her, and I said to her, hold on, let me patch in your dad. And I called my husband and I said to him, so Ella has this big question. Yeah. And so we spoke on that video call, and I made her understand that in as much as she's adopted, she'll always be a part of us. And it doesn't matter how she came, but she was God's gift to us. And she came at the time when we needed her. But we need her to understand that we need to have our own children. And the same way that she loves us, the same way that we love her, we want her to love her siblings that way. Mm. So now she's excited, she's open to it. But I feel like she's a little selfish in how she loves. Yeah. And so that will be an issue where we really have to sort of like create that bond between our biological kids and her. But we don't like to really throw out the term adoption, and we use our God-given child because she's given to us by God at a time that God saw fit. So Ella lost her mom last year in March. And when her mom gave her to me and my husband, she always knew that would be our daughter. And my daughter is a splitting image of my husband. I don't know how God did that. And so it's amazing. It's learning things all together and having a teenager. It's different when you have a baby.
It's a natural progression.
Yeah, so now having a teenager that looks at you like you're their whole world and they don't have any drop of your blood, it's a little different. But my family has been a great support system. They've really welcomed her. They've taken, the time to be a part of her life, and she's a part of theirs. And every few months, my mom takes out time and visits her, and they have this grandma and granddaughter bond. So I'm thankful for that. And it's not easy because ideally, when I thought of adoption, I wanted a baby, but God gave me a teenager. So it's different, but it's beautiful.
It is.
It's beautiful to hear. And I know you and I, especially, could go on and on
Yes,
and on.
please.
But before I let you go, as a couple that's really dealt with the whole waiting aspect of trying to start a family and how that is not the easiest at times, just look into any of these two cameras in front of you
Yeah.
and just give encouragement to a couple that's in your shoes today. It doesn't matter whether it's been 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I'd just love for you to say something because you've gone ahead of them in the journey.
Okay, so I don't know what time you're watching this, where you're watching this from, but coming from me, it's not easy. I've been waiting for 14 years. And in that 14 years, I've dealt with the grief, I've dealt with the anger, and I've dealt with the joy. But I want you to get to a place where you trust God. And trusting God sometimes may not look like what you want. It may not look what is possible at the time because you're angry, because you're seeing your cycle. For somebody, it might be you're going through several miscarriages. For someone, you might have just got in the news as a man that you can't actually have children. But I want you to realize that parenting is not the way that you envision it. The Bible says that even before we can be parents, we're parents to so many. So you have to first start with the environment that you're in. How are you parenting those that God has given you? Your nieces, your nephews, your cousins, those who are younger. Can they learn from you? Can they see the example? It won't be easy. The journey won't be easy. But what is sure is that God is faithful. We serve a God who's omnipresent. He's omniscient. And in his time, he does it. He did it for Hannah. He did it for Abraham. He did it for Elizabeth and John. And I believe God is doing it for you. If you can trust him, you can hold on to him. Faith as little as a mustard seed is all you need. It shouldn't change the direction in your home. It shouldn't make your home unbearable. But this time of waiting should sweeten, should edify who God is in your life.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much,
Thank you so much for
Tintin.
having me.
Before I let you go, I just want to say I think she's adequately touched on anyone that's dealing with the longing, with the doubt, with the misplaced shame that couples, experience today in as far as infertility is concerned. It's a very difficult topic, and we've filtered it through faith, only because faith does not make things easy. It makes things possible. That's a wrap for today. Don't forget to catch the show on Radio Christian Voice and look out for the full episode on the YouTube channels for the Urban Evangelist and Radio Christian Voice. Thank you so much.